Shabbat Shalom, my dear friends. I hope you're doing well. With Purim now behind us, Passover in front of us, we've now entered the period on the Jewish calendar, which is the time of storytelling. We've just told the story of the Megillah, of Haman, of Esther, and of Mordechai, and of the extraordinary salvation of the Jewish people. And we're proceeding and we're preparing for Pesach, for Passover, as we'll begin to tell the story of the formation of our people and of the redemption from Egypt. The stories that we tell about our lives, that's what defines us. And the stories of so many have been altered. A very unpleasant chapter has been inserted over the last number of weeks. I'd like to share some reflections on the experiences that I had together with my daughter Avia and together with my two dear friends and colleagues, Rabbis Pupko and Fishman, as we traveled to Poland, to the Ukrainian border, over the course or last week, and visited with many of the refugees and did our best to try, at the very least, in the lives of those who we met, to make something of a difference, and to come back to you, to come back to our communities with some insights and answers as to how we can help out and how we can contribute to making their lives stories just a little bit better. We traveled first to Warsaw, visited with refugees who are living in refugee centers, with those who were displaced and those who were at home just a few days earlier and now are in a new country with a new language, everything being provided in terms of life's basics, in terms of the essentials, but with an uncertain future. When can we go back home? Can we go back home? When can we be reunited with our families? Are our husbands, are our fathers, are our sons okay? Those who stayed back in Ukraine to fight for freedom, to fight against Russia, to fight against Putin. We traveled and stayed in the town of Tomashav Lubelsky, which is a town that really I wasn't familiar with before, and the only reason we found it was because I looked for hotels near the border, and there were no hotels available near the border, and so I searched 10 kilometers to the west and didn't find anything, 10 more kilometers to the west, didn't find anything, 10 more kilometers to the west, and soon enough we were an hour drive from the border, but the first hotel we found was in Tomashav Lubelsky. Tomashav Lubelsky, depending on which story you tell, that's how you define where it is. We're talking to a Jew who's a student of history. If you're a student of Hasidic history, of Jewish scholarship, you'll know that Tomashav Lubelsky is right between Ishbitz and Lezhensk. It's right near the birthplace of the Kotzker Rebbe. The names that are associated with these places are extraordinary. If you're a student of the Holocaust and of Holocaust memory, you can describe Tomashav Lubelsky in a different way. You can say it's right near Belzec. It's just south of Majdanek. The story that we choose to tell, it differs. Sometimes we tell this chapter, sometimes we tell that chapter, but truthfully, the purpose of our visit was not one of memory. You can't escape memory in Poland. It's there. It traps you, it captures you. But at the same time, we were there to help those who are suffering today. We were there proudly as Jews, wearing our kippot, there to help Ukrainians, there to help the Polish people in their efforts to help their humanitarian efforts, which have been extraordinary. We traveled to the town of Przemysl, and Przemysl is a town right near the border. It's a town with a great Jewish history. We went to the synagogue, which is serving as a refugee relief center, and we went to the train station. I'll tell you, with the knowledge and the understanding of Jewish history, to be standing in a train station in Poland, there as people were taking the trains to freedom, was an extraordinary experience. Those same train tracks, they haven't replaced the train tracks. Those same train tracks, which took Jews to their death, to their murder just 80 years ago, were now taking Ukrainians, and amongst them so many Jews, to their safety, to their freedom. It's an extraordinary world. And as we walked around, we tried to help, we bought basic needs for people, we distributed hand warmers and foot warmers and blankets and Kinder eggs, chocolates and chocolate bars and all kinds of goodies and toys. And we did this all over the country because families are there, they're alone. Again, husbands and fathers are back home. Mothers are there with their children, with the elders as well. And they're in need, and they're in dire need. And the tragic part, and part of the tragedy, is that those who have been helped, they've gone on and they're settled somewhere, and they're at the next stage of their journey. But you know what? Those train stations are still full. They're still packed because new people have come in, because this flood of refugees, this flood of people in needs, it doesn't stop. It's incessant. It continues to come on and on and on. And the needs, they grow and they grow and they grow. And while we were in this town of Przemysl, we looked up some of the scholarship of this town, and I came across this book. I'd never heard of the book before. It's called Imre Regesh. And Imre Regesh was written by a rabbi whose name was Rav Gedaliahu Shmelkes, who was the Rav of this town in the early 20th century. And it's called the Imre Regesh. The Hebrew word Regesh means excitement, energy, emotion. And it's the acronym for the words Rav Gedaliahu Shmelkes, the name of the author. And he put the first letters of his name, Rabbi Gedaliahu Shmelkes, Reish Gimel Shin, formed the word Regesh. The Imre Regesh said something extraordinary. He said, and it was a quote that I'll take with me for the rest of my life. It was so beautiful. And the quote said, talking about Moses and talking about the sacrifice that Moses made as a leader. And it said that Moses was prepared to make a sacrifice which made him greater than any of the other leaders. Why? Because he was ready to sacrifice, in the Hebrew, likorban al mizbeach ahavat Yisrael, as a sacrifice on the altar of love for Israel. And isn't that an altar that we would all sacrifice on, sacrifice ourselves, sacrifice our own needs? And what we saw when we were in Poland, what we saw with the Ukrainian refugees was sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice. We saw a young family in a donation center in Warsaw, and they were there, father and two children. And the daughter, must have been 9 or 10 years old, was carrying a sled. And I went up to him and I said, why do you have this sled with you? They said, we're coming to donate the sled. There was no snow on the ground, and we're in the middle of central Warsaw. Why? Why are they donating the sled? Because the daughter received this sled as a Christmas gift. And when the family was talking about what they could give, she said, well, I have a brand new sled. And maybe there's going to be somebody who comes through, a refugee who comes through, who's going to go to a place where there are mountains and where there's snow, and they're going to need a sled, so they should have my sled. That's sacrifice. That's extraordinary. We saw people prepared to sacrifice their own comforts. The Jewish community in Warsaw has leased 2 RVs, 2 trucks, 2 vans, 2 RVs to bring to the border because there's nowhere to sleep at the border. And so if you want to volunteer at the border, you have to find somewhere to sleep. So why not bring your own RV with the volunteers to make sure that they can do the important work that they do and still have a place to sleep at night? Sacrifice that people are willing to make. And of course, the sacrifice that the whole country is making right now. Everything is directed towards these refugees. Again, the Jewish community of Warsaw talking to the leadership about their plans for Purim. How have your plans changed? Well, you can't compare. In the beginning, we were planning a modest Purim party, what we usually do. And now, of course, with COVID, and we're coming out of COVID, and it's still going to be modest. But now, with hundreds and thousands of Jewish refugees in the city, our Purim party has to accommodate thousands. Passover Seders. Usually we have Passover Seder in one hotel, and people come and we kosher it, and it's great and it's wonderful. And now, can you imagine? Can you imagine how many thousands of people the Jewish community is going to have to accommodate? This is a new chapter for the story, of course, of the Ukrainians, of the Jews in Ukraine, of the Jews of Russia, of the Russians. Everyone is writing their chapter of the story, of the Sipur. The stories that we tell, the story of Purim, of salvation, the story of Passover, of redemption, and our own stories right now. Each one of us is writing a chapter. Each one of us is writing the next sentence in our own life story. And as the stories of others are being altered and changed, How is our story going to reflect that? That's the question we're all asking ourselves at this time. What can I do to help? And whatever the answer is, and there's not the same answer for every person, but whatever the answer is, one thing we know for sure is that there is an answer. There is always a way to help, whether it's through a contribution, whether it's through a gesture of kindness, whether it's through picking up and going somewhere to help with people in need, whether it's opening our homes to refugees as the opportunities will present themselves in the next short while. There's always a way to add an aspect of kindness, of hospitality, of redemption and salvation to our own life stories. Praying for peace, praying for strength for the entire world, praying that Russia's attack on Ukraine comes to an immediate stop, praying that peace prevails both there and here, both globally and in our families and in our own souls, and praying for a Shabbat of Shalom, of peace. Good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom.
It's hard to believe that exactly 2 years ago from this Shabbat is when we first felt COVID. Exactly 2 years ago, the Shabbat after Purim was when we at the Scheier had to close down. 2 years in which the entire world literally turned upside down. This is one of the concepts that we experience in Purim. In Hebrew, it's called Venahafochu. Literally, we turn everything upside down. Everything switches. Of course, the story of Purim begins on a very difficult note in which a calamity is about to be had by all the Jewish population. However, that calamity turns into victory, into which the Jews end up ruling their enemies. Currently, there's another tragedy taking place around the world, in which people's lives are being turned upside down. Every day we hear of the horrific stories of families being disconnected from loved ones, being ripped apart, and as well being homeless, and having to search for a new home around the world. Their world has turned upside down, and of course I'm talking about those victims of war in Ukraine. And so on this Shabbat, in which we actually celebrate Venahafochu, when we as Jews felt the darkness turn into light, we hope and we pray that all those that are suffering around the world also really quickly feel the Venahafochu, where their world turns upside down from darkness into light. The Torah portion which we read on Purim deals with Amalek, which is the arch enemy of the Jewish people. We were attacked senselessly by Amalek, who not only attacked us, but attacked the vulnerable. This might sound quite familiar to what is happening now in the world. And so I want to share with you the Torah reading of Purim.
ויבוא עמלק וילחם עם ישראל ברפידים ויאמר משה אל יהושע בחר לנו אנשים וצא הילחם בעמלק מחר אנוכי ניצב על ראש הגבעה ומטה האלוהים בידי ויעש יהושע כאשר אמר לו משה להילחם בעמלק ומשה אהרון וחור עלו ראש הגבעה והיה כאשר ירים משה ידו וגבר ישראל וכאשר יניח ידו וגבר עמלק וידי משה כבדים ויקחו אבן וישימו תחתיו וישב עליה ואהרון וחור תמכו בידיו מזה אחד ומזה אחד ויהי ידיו אמונה עד בוא השמש ויחלוש יהושע את עמלק ואת עמו לפי חרב, ויאמר אדוני אל משה, כתוב זאת זיכרון בספר ושים באוזני יהושע, כי מחו אמחת זכר עמלק מתחת השמיים. ויבן משה מזבח, ויקרא שמו אדוני ניסי, ויאמר כי יד על כס יה מלחמה לאדוני בעמלק מדור דור.
And so just as the reading on Purim deals with the ultimate victory, and as well the support that Moses needed to have in order for that victory to be had, we pray that v'nahafochu, that for all those that are suffering around the world, may this Shabbat bring about a change in which all the support which they shall receive will also bring about a time of peace. Shabbat Shalom.